So I'm really pleased, and I've been so fortunate in my career to have the privilege and several opportunities to assume leadership roles in higher education. And I want to make a disclaimer, and I guess that at the very onset of the talk, and I guess that's a very uniquely female thing to do. So, you know, men don't make disclaimers as often, but it doesn't matter. It's the right thing to do just to give you the context. And that disclaimer is I'm not a scholar of leadership. I do want to talk about research and scholarship. I am a scholar, I am a teacher, and I'm very dedicated to research as a way of knowing, including for social work. But my own area of scholarship, as you could hear from Eileen's nice and wonderful introduction, is not in leadership. So my work is in services to children and families, peer helping, and particularly families that find themselves in extremely disadvantaged positions, such as being engaged with the child welfare system. But I'm a practitioner of leadership, so I'm really coming to you today as a practitioner and speaking from a practitioner point of view. And this event has given me the opportunity to reflect a little bit on what I consider my own approach to leadership, how it jives with some of the scientific findings about leadership, some of which I know you've heard about already, but it's kind of interesting to reflect on those. And then we'll have some conversation about your own ideas and experiences. So I am going to talk about personal experience, what's worked for me, how I figured out for myself some of the issues and the challenges. And once again, as I mentioned earlier, there's so many leaders here in the audience that I look forward to, really engaging in a dialogue. So where do I want to begin? Well, there's two really fine articles in your packets, and I hope that you'll take a moment to take a look at them. But just to summarize some of the ideas in them, the articles are pretty definitive. Despite years of true progress in the advancement of women in our society, and I'm of the age where I was the cohort that was participating in consciousness-raising groups when I was in college, and it was really the early phase still of the women's movement, and it was such an exciting time. And there has been tremendous progress, true progress in the advancement of women in our society. But despite that, women still lag in representation in leadership roles and in the pay that they receive for the leadership that they provide. And the Eagley and Carley article in your packet it's a beautiful summary of the research on this topic. So today, women occupy 40%, more than 40% of all management positions in the U.S., and that's the progress part. That wasn't true in 1975, so we've made a lot of progress. Many more women are in the workforce today. I didn't bring those statistics, but we know that has climbed. But still women lag in terms of executive positions, and particularly in every sector, not just one. Only 2% of the Fortune 500 companies have CEOs who are women. Only 15% of their boards positions are occupied by women. And typically, and this is true for boards of almost any kind of organization, government sector, non-governmental sector, private business, as the Fortune 500 shows. And those women who are on board positions, who are on boards of those companies or those organizations, are typically in the less powerful board positions. So they're even further underrepresented as chairs of the board, as treasurers. The finance part is, more often male-dominated, the positions of power. So in another study, Pines reports in the nonprofit sector that this is a little bit older. In 1996, women comprised only 16% of nonprofit organization chief executives, and for those chief executives, their salaries were $30,000 lower on average than their male counterpart CEOs. Margaret Gibbelman, who's a social worker and has done a study within my own profession, social work, a woman-dominated profession, has found that women are underrepresented in upper management of most social service organizations, and that, again, when women were in leadership roles, they earn lower salaries than men in comparable positions. So similar findings have been reported in other studies of public interest organizations, and it's even more pronounced for organizations, large organizations with large budgets. So the bigger and the more complex an organization is, the more male-dominated it tends to be. This is true for federal government positions, and even in higher education, where women have approached and in some fields exceeded 50% of professorship positions, they still lag in top administrative roles and particularly in presidential roles in higher education. So this persistent underrepresentation and under-earning is true for every sector. So what's the conclusion of these data, from these data? Well, first of all, women lag in leadership advancement and pay, even after 3 decades of progress. And there has been progress. I don't have the statistics on progress, but there has been progress of women participating in the workforce and taking more management and leadership roles. This has often been referred to as the glass ceiling, and that's probably a term that you've heard a lot, that there just seems to be a point. It looks like you can get all the way to the top, but you keep bumping your head on it, even though it's invisible. I think that's been very evocative for many of us. And on the other hand, the article I pointed out to you, Eagley and Carley, try to take a little different point of view, and they say instead of using the metaphor of a glass ceiling, think instead about a labyrinth, and that there's many twists and turns, and that you have to make choices, and you don't know which way is going to be the pathway through, or in which way is going to make you stuck. So they use a little different metaphor, but they say there are walls all around and ambiguity about what direction to take. But whatever metaphor you use, it's clear that there are institutional factors in place that limit the advancement of women. Institutional factors, something above a sexist boss or an unfriendly organization, something bigger operating. So I'm going to turn a little bit to talk about institutionalized sexism, and then I'll reflect a little bit on my own individual experience. Because these findings suggest that there is institutionalized sexism. It's bigger than you and me. It's bigger than any individual. It's something about our systems of organizations, of economics, of gender roles in our society that provide impediments to women moving to the top leadership positions. So here's some data, some results on this topic of institutionalized sexism and women in leadership. In a GAO, Government Accountability Office study in 2000 of a nationally representative sample of Americans, women earned 44% less than men. This is, a replication of some of the earlier data I shared with you. When the researchers controlled for education and work experience, because of course women spend more time out of the labor market on maternity leaves and family care kinds of needs and so on, and women Well, we'll have to ask Mary Braybrecht what the statistics are on women in education, but even, because I don't currently know, I know now women are more than 50% of the students on many college campuses, so I don't know whether we've reached parity in education, but even when you control for education and work experience, women still earn 22% less than men. Here's an interesting finding. In the same study, marriage and parenthood were associated with higher wages for men, but lower wages for women. Hard to explain that without an institutional kind of a phenomenon going on. Promotions came slower for women in this same study, and even in female professions, nursing, social work, elementary education, men ascended to leadership roles disproportionate to their presence in the profession. So that Eagley and Carley conclude, and I quote, "A general bias against women appears to operate with approximate strength at all levels." So furthermore, women are also shouldering still a disproportionate share of domestic duties in families, even after 30 to 40 years of progress in sharing domestic roles. I think that I didn't put the exact figures in here, but I think it used to be that women did the vast majority of domestic work, and now it may be down to a 30% gradient instead of a 70% gradient. But nevertheless, there's still a substantial difference, even though men have picked up the ball in terms of domestic duties. Now, here's part of how do these institutional processes operate. There have been a lot of interesting studies on attitudes about women and men, and particularly leadership in women and men. And these are attitudes that are held by men, but also held by women, and they're kind of at a general population level. But there are some persistent findings. When you ask people, men and women, what traits they associate with male leaders, with males, not leaders yet, but males that then help them with leadership, the traits that the general public state are aggressiveness, ambition, self-confidence, that's the no disclaimer, forcefulness, self-reliance, and individualism. Right? That's what are the traits that are shared across our culture about men and men in that advance leadership roles. Now, in this same study, the investigators ask, well, what traits do you associate with female gender? And not surprisingly to any of you, the traits are communal traits. So the male traits were instrumental, the female traits are communal. And those traits that are associated with female gender are compassion, affection for others, friendliness, kindness, sympathetic nature, sensitive, gentle, soft-spoken, something I've lost along the way, but anyway, I used to be soft-spoken. And so you see the socio-emotional side of, and by the way, these are not necessarily irrelevant to leadership. Not necessarily irrelevant to leadership, but they're the socio-emotional side lacking the instrumental side, which is associated with maleness. So this results in a paradox, okay? So women who are in leadership roles who exhibit female communal qualities are, and this has been done in a series of clever experiments where these are not real life experiences, but rather experiments where you will give, like a written script. You omit saying the gender of the person, and then you ask the respondent whether it's a man or a woman who you're describing in this script. And so women who exhibit female communal qualities are assumed to have less leadership potential. They're not tough enough to be a leader. And again, this is broad generalizations. This is, expectational sets that are endemic to our American culture today about women in leadership. But with the same, in these same studies, when you script a woman who has assertive, ambitious, competitive style, the same style that's so positively associated with male leadership, these very women are viewed as ineffective leaders because they're overly aggressive, control freaks, and very much vilified. I see some nods. Some of you have been there in terms of being in this paradoxical situation. So once again, I'm reading a quote. I think there's a real penalty for a woman who behaves like a man. The men don't like her, and the women don't either. So this holds for women's responses. It's not just men's responses, it's women's responses to women. And think about your own career and your own experience. I can think of female leaders, that have been above me in organizations in the past, and I'll own up to it. I thought to myself, they're acting, just way too bitchy. I'll say it. And they're acting, too much like an aggressive man, right? And who knows, maybe that probably has been said about me too, but this is the kind of paradox that there is for women in leadership roles. And these are the kinds of things we grapple with in everyday situations, how to be decisive. I felt a lot of pressure on myself. And some of it may have to do with my own style. Some of it has to do, I think, with these gender expectations. But when I first named as dean up at SUNY Albany many years ago, I just felt it upon myself that I had to have I felt like I needed to be tough, not tough in a negative, punitive way, but make sure I was action-oriented. I really felt the burden, and to this day, I try to be very action-oriented, and part of that is to, through action, negate some of the negative stereotype of a, supportive, kind, nurturing woman. And when I left the deanship at Albany, a dear friend and mentor, they wrote me a little album, and this to me just captured it all. And he's a dear friend and a mentor, and he wrote to me, Lynn, when you were first named dean, I didn't think you had it in you. I didn't think you were tough enough. I didn't think you, I just didn't think you were going to survive the politics of this place. And he ends it by saying, and I'm happy to say you've proven me wrong on all of that. And I took that as one of the greatest compliments of my colleagues when I was, moving out of that leadership role. So what to do with these dynamics? And while they're not identical to these institutional dynamics such as we see in racism, and they're not identical, and I honestly don't think they're as severe and entrenched in our society as racism is, for example. There's something of the same dynamic about it in terms of these institutional expectations, broadly shared even by, women, people from the same group, and so on. So how do you deal with these dynamics when you're put in a leadership role? And I'm also a believer, by the way, leadership doesn't begin when you become a manager or a dean. Leadership really begins from moment one in your career, and it begins by things like stepping up, sharing the good ideas, taking initiative, and coming up with creative alternatives for problem solving. So I do firmly believe that leadership begins there. It's not the position, but it is the behavior and the willingness to take initiative of at whatever level you're working at now. And I do say that very genuinely to all my students. So how do you deal with these dynamics? First of all, it's been said many times, but I think it's very, very true. You have to have a thick skin. You simply cannot take it personally It's just really too self-defeating if you take it personally. And, you know, by the way, having a thick skin is a very male trait. You should know that, you know, that's part of what's associated. But nevertheless, I think it's a good trait to try to cultivate. It just takes a little more cultivation for women. And I'm not saying men don't feel wounded also. I think, you know, I'm not saying it's all or nothing, but I do think a thick skin, not taking it personally helps. It's not about you. It's not even about the other person, and so vilifying the other person isn't going to get you very far either, vilifying the person who's behaving in a sexist way to you. It won't probably, I hope already won't come as a surprise to my colleagues here at the school, but I think optimism and a positive attitude are very important, and that kind of goes along with developing a thick skin. That combination, optimism, positive expectation, and a thick skin can get you pretty darn far. Really, I mean that. I think it can get you very far. Here's something else I did, and maybe I shouldn't be proud of this and kind of bragging about it, but I found over time I was making a sport of proving them wrong. So I, you know, remembered experiencing low expectations, not just by my colleague who told me years later he was worried about if I had the mettle to do the job, but in any kind of situation, you can pick it up when people don't expect much of you. You're unproven, and, you know, you just get the vibes. They're not really expecting you to speak up, to know anything about the subject matter, whatever it is. So it is, you can turn it around and make it kind of fun if you make a, you know, kind of make a sport of surpassing expectations and enjoying it. And there is, I mean, I've had enjoyment in surpassing those expectations, and here's how you can, you know, here's, I think, some of the ingredients of how to do that. First of all, you always, obviously, we want to continually learn and build knowledge. I think that's really important. You're not expert in the area you're working in now, we'll learn about it. It's amazing how much you can learn. A smart person with a good mind can learn a lot. And, well, I'll give you an example. My last job, where I was vice president for research, I think one of the only vice presidents for research, maybe the only, in a Research One university in the country. And our biggest initiative at Albany, we were really strong in the social sciences, which I did have credibility in. But my job, as you heard from Eileen's little summary of my bio, was to build the life sciences. And I didn't I do have a nursing degree. I do have a Bachelor of Science and very good science training, but didn't seem that way to the you know, PhD scientists who were heading up these research institutes we were creating. So what did I do to tackle that situation? Well, first of all, I think in a leadership role, you have to know what the organizational priorities are. And a mistake I've seen a lot of leaders make is they only make the area that they're familiar with a priority. Big mistake. If you're working for an institution, an organization that's broader than social work, you can't make social work your only priority. That's not a way to develop credibility. And so in this particular job, I needed to, you know, and here's how I reconciled it. I wasn't going to let social sciences slip in order to advance life sciences. That I knew would be easy to do. That's an easy way to build life sciences. Take resources out of social sciences and put it into life sciences. So I said to myself, I'm not going to do that, but I am going to work really hard. I'm going to learn about life science today, genomics, and RNA research. I'm going to learn about it, and I'm going to advance it. And I'll never be the expert in it, but I'm going to know enough to know a good idea when our scientists give it. And again, if you have a bright mind and you're research trained, you know a good scientific idea. You know how to read the literature, and even if you're not expert in it. So thinking through the organizational priorities, standing behind it, even in the areas that are not your personal specialization, learning more about the field, and supporting good ideas and good people are the way that I dealt with that. And I think I have to say, I think that worked reasonably well. We did advance life sciences. I wasn't afraid of performance. That's another thing I think is extremely important. I've been saying it quite a bit. I'm an empiricist, and I hold myself to performance, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. I did in this case, and I think it added to my credibility over time. Another strategy for how to deal with institutional sexism, and that is use mentorship. I've been really fortunate to have wonderful mentors, more male than female, actually, just by chance. And when someone recognizes your leadership potential and can create opportunities for you, pursue those opportunities. But also realize every opportunity will come with a cost. So I had an opportunity pretty early in my career. I really just became an associate professor when I became dean the first time at Albany. And I took the opportunity, being that optimistic, kind of I can do anything kind of person at some level. And yeah, it came with a cost. I had young kids, and the cost that I chose to trade in that situation was what might have been an even more stellar scholarship career. So, those are the kinds of costs in terms of how you trade off and balance what all the options might be. I don't regret it, but I never finished. Some people become deans after they finish their scholarship, and, they're 60 years old and, at the peak of their field. But for me, I became a dean much younger, and so I've had to live with, and I don't mind it at all. I'm still becoming a scholar, so I'm still working hard at my scholarship, and never felt like I was in a position where I could or wanted to turn away from that. The choices are different in different fields, but I think the choices are always there in terms of what's possible. So, all right, I better start, since I got this many pages left, I better start moving it along. I do want to talk about two other areas of research and just say a little bit about my own experiences with each of those. You've heard so much about transactional versus transformational leadership. It's everywhere. Since 1978, I guess, is when Bass and later Burns, developed these ideas of transactional versus transformational leadership. And so the issue is, what's the best style for a leader to have? And here's what transactional leadership is. It's really derives out of social exchange theory and operant behavior theory principles. It's all about reward. It's all about exchanges, what you get when you give, and making sure that balance is, what you want it to be. And then also rewarding good performance, and, you shouldn't focus too much, even with transactional leadership, on punishment. But yes, punishment's a part of it. And following through with non-performance or performance problems, if you're a manager, that's part of transactional leadership. So it focuses on interactions between leaders and followers. And in the transactions, the leader's really looking out for themselves. They're looking to have exchange benefits with their subordinates and to clarify a sense of duty with rewards and punishments. That's the essence of transactional leadership. Transformational leadership, according to Burns, is a process in which, quote, leaders and followers help each other to advance to a higher level of morale and motivation. It's the inspirational kind of leadership. And transformational approaches, according to Burns, create significant changes in the lives of people who are in organizations and in the lives and effectiveness of organizations. It redesigns perceptions, values, and changes expectations and aspirations of employees. So when you've worked for somebody who really motivates you to do your personal best, sounds like a coaching kind of thing, right? That's an example of transformational leadership. And unlike transactional leadership, transformational leadership is not based on give and take relationships, but instead on the leader's personality and traits and ability to make a change or to lead an organization through vision and goals, and especially vision, as opposed to checking whether everyone does their job properly. And transformational leadership is based on creating motivation and aspiration, modeling integrity. A lot of research shows that transformational leaders are admired tremendously by the people in the organization for their own personal integrity and also by engendering respect in the organization, and transformational leaders are very often admired. So what are some of the findings about transformational versus transactional leadership? First of all, it's not either or. It turns out in the best research that you need to have both kinds of leadership in order to be an effective leader. So you need to be transformational as well as transactional, and the leaders who have a balance of both styles produce the most positive outcomes in organizations. Second finding that's kind of interesting, women tend to have more transformational leadership style than men do. Just basic gender differences. And this is probably due to women's communal socio-emotional qualities that we talked about earlier. So, you know, women actually have a little bit of a trait edge in using a transformational leadership style. In one interesting study, this was an interesting little study of a nonprofit orchestra. So a really unique kind of, not a social service organization, but a nonprofit organization. And the authors did a nice little job of comparing transformational and transactional leadership. And here's what they found. First of all, they found both leadership styles were important. So it's not either or, but it's the right balance of both. Okay? And that's the instrumental along with the vision and inspiration part. But transformational leadership had a bigger effect on positive performance in this orchestra. So there was a slight edge to transformational leadership. Second of all, transformational leadership led to more positive emotions about work and fewer negative emotions among the employees. And again, think to your own experience. Haven't you had jobs that you just hated to get up in the morning and go to, and whether it was now or earlier in your life, you know, that's the kind of negative emotional state that can be created in the workplace. And so the study found that transformational leadership led to more positive emotion and fewer negative emotions about work. And there's more to the story. More positive emotions and less negative emotions were associated with better worker performance. So the emotional position of the employees of an organization are in fact associated with the performance of the organization, and the leadership style, the right balance of transactional and transformational affects the emotional experience of the employees of the organization and ultimately the performance of the organization. So the authors gave the edge to the transformational leaders that had enough. Sufficient. I can't define what that sufficient is, but a sufficient amount of the transactional components. So what are some of the implications for women? As I said earlier, I do think transactional leadership is especially important for women. There's no research on this, but it's just in my own experience. Getting things done, visible action can be very powerful in dispelling some of those gender stereotypes. Aspiring to, second of all, how does one, because I think in a lot of ways, my own opinion is transformational leadership is a kind of aspirational state. You know, almost nobody is a transformational leader. You could aspire to it, but that's about as far as you can go. So how to strive to be a transformational leader. This is just my personal thoughts, and I would welcome your thoughts as well. I really think that starting with a strong values position and a strong sense of goals in the organization is important because having a strong values position, there's many times where a leader needs to make a tough decision about, you have to do something, and neither decision is perfect, and you have to weigh one against the other. And I think that strong values position can really be a very good guide. It doesn't make for perfect decisions, but at least you can have a kind of values and intellectual coherence to the choices that you make. Second of all, always learn. I think that's essential, and that's, I think essential for any strong leadership. Third, respect and fairness. And again, that goes back to these value principles. How it's so easy to be disrespectful in human interaction. Let's just say that. It's easy when you're in a heated argument and you're taking different positions. It's easy to slip into disrespect. But if you're starting from a strong values position about respect, then I think, then at least you can come back and become centered again. So I think there's a link between respect and that values position. And if I worked with a woman once who was, I privately thought she was, a good example of the wrong kind of woman leader. She was a Gestapo. She was all about telling you, telling you no. She was all about telling you no. And kind of enjoying it and making you very unhappy about it. And I said to her at one time, we were working together on something, and we had to tell someone no, that they weren't going to get a big new research instrument because we didn't have the money. And I said to her, I know how to tell someone no and have them leave my office not furious. I know how to tell someone no and have them accept that this was the only decision that could be made right now. And she was like, shocked about that. But I think, when I reflected on that after I said it, I think that really comes from not saying no because of being a power position, in a position of power over the other person, but saying no because it's a rational thing to do. And I'm big on rational as well, rational decision-making on top of a strong values base. That can give you a consistency in the hard decisions you have to make and so on. And I think that's how I aspire to be transformational. A couple more points, and then we'll move right along. We're almost at 5 o'clock. I wanted to end around 5. Remove the burden from yourself of thinking all the good ideas have to come from you. They don't, and they won't. And, good ideas come from other people. Good ideas come from many different places in a positive functioning organization. And your job as a leader is to listen. Listen and pick up on those good ideas and support those good ideas. And then don't forget to give credit to the person who generated that idea. I think that's the other thing, that it's so easy. Like, truth is, that list of accomplishments that I gave Eileen, I didn't accomplish any of those. I supported the good people who had the capacity and, could really do it. But, and I think it's really important to do that in an organization. And then, finally, aspiring to be a transformational leader, I personally think it's really important to build a sense of community shared goals within the community. And I've worked in a situation in an organization, research universities, where that's a special challenge, because research universities, sometimes the job of dean is described as herding cats. And faculty, you and I are the cats, right? So everyone's doing their own thing. It's entrepreneurial. Personal achievement is, academic environments are all about personal achievement, not as much the communal good. And again, of course, it's a balance. I still think building a sense of community is always going to pay off in terms of the effectiveness of an organization. And again, communicating a vision that's consistent with the shared goals. And the shared goals can't be set by the leader. They got to be derived by the collective, by the group that's working together. And that's a good set of challenging skills as well. The last thing I'm going to talk about, I couldn't resist. If some of you were at this fall's Women's Forum, is that what it was called, Mary? We had Professor Linda Babcock in, and she was talking about her fascinating book called Women Don't Ask. And it's all about women in negotiation. And the findings, and this builds on the work of Deborah Tannen. I can't remember the name of her book, but you might have, she's a linguist, and she studies communication styles and gender. And so I have to say, I'll tell you honestly, this has been an area where I frequently question my own effectiveness in negotiating, particularly for myself. So let me ask, have you ever accepted a job only to find out when you accept it that you're paid significantly lower than others in a similar position? I have. In fact, when I became the vice president for research at Albany, the then president said, well, I'll give you summer salary and a 15% increase in your salary. And that sounded, summer salary is something faculty get over and above their base salary. That's how academic institutions work. That sounded pretty good to me, right? Well, lo and behold, that next year, that was just interim, so okay, maybe I wasn't, rightly or wrongly shooting for the top. But in the next year, we happened to hire at least 4 more new vice presidents. It was a leadership change at the time in the institution. And lo and behold, every single one of them was earning men and women, $40,000 more than I was after this increase. $40,000 more than I was. So when, for a whole host of reasons, the institution wanted me to stay on, not in an interim capacity, but make a commitment for a period of time to provide stability for the research growth, to stay as vice president for research. So what did I do? What did I need to do to raise my salary? Well, ultimately, I had to be willing to walk away. I had to be willing to say to the then president, who was a different one than the one who hired me. That's a different story. But I had to be willing to say, I know what everyone else is making. Knowledge is power. I didn't have that knowledge. I didn't think to even ask when I went into it. And I wasn't, 22 years old back then either, so I should have known to ask. So being willing to walk away from it, I happened to be fortunate that the institution was in a position where there was something to be gained by having me stably in that role for a few more years. So the dynamics of the situation worked out such that then I succeeded. There have been many times I haven't succeeded, but I did finish that job with the last few years with what I thought was what I knew was a commensurate salary with others at my leadership level in the organization. So yes, it's true. Several meta-analyses of lots of different research studies have shown that women are less effective in negotiating overall compared with men. Here's some of the more detailed findings. Women are oriented toward different kinds of outcomes. They're less prestige-focused and less kind of dominance-focused in the negotiation, which is partly what produces the less effective result. Another thing that the research has shown that women often go into negotiations like I did in my own job without sufficient comparative information. If you don't do your homework, if you don't know, if you don't think it through and you don't really know what the options might be, then you're going to be in a disadvantaged position. When other studies that have looked at the behavior of women in negotiating situations, this is something I feel I still struggle with, that women tend to be more equivocal and less aggressive. And I don't like the idea of being like, we used to have a scale that we created of aggressiveness and do anything to achieve your goals, and it would be slick, slimy, and I forget the third level. It's like sludge or something like that. Something you didn't want to be. But anyway, so there are behavioral differences. And then the other finding is that the position of power Oh, this is an interesting finding. There have been some other studies that look not just at gender, but what position of power is the person in when they start the negotiation. And sure enough, that corrects for some of the gender differences. But once again, women are, for institutional and cultural reasons, and because they don't have as many of the high positions in the organization, they're often bargaining when they are in the position of lesser power. So I think that's a fact of life. So there are consistent but small but consistent effects that men produce better negotiation outcomes than women, but women can perform better in negotiation under two conditions. One, when there are incentives for their performance, and you can create your own incentives. That's part of the preparation and, doing the background research and thinking through for yourself, what is it you really want to get out of this situation and how far will you go to compromise. And I think just preparation can really, you can provide yourself an incentive for a certain outcome. And also women perform better when constituents were involved. So if they were negotiating for a cause, the clients, or the faculty of the school, or whatever the cause is, that produced better negotiation results in women. So again, what to do as a person a woman in a leadership role. Do your research ahead of time. Be prepared for the negotiation. Know your limits, how far you'll go, when you'll walk away. Sometimes you can't walk away, and let's face it, that gives you a less strong bargaining power for sure. And 3, identify for yourself incentives for performance, or identify the accountability you want to have to your constituents and use that as a motivating factor. Okay, so I'm going to stop and just say a few concluding remarks. So what can we do, we have an imperfect society, imperfect systems within which we're working. So what's our responsibility vis-a-vis changing the status quo? And I do think we have to think about that, because how else are we going to change it except by repeated individual actions and repeated individual reshaping of thinking and so on. So here's a couple of things to consider with that. First of all, I think it's really important for women to accept the responsibility of being mentors. For men and women, it doesn't have to be only for other women, but I think some of our personal gender-based traits make us, kind of naturally inclined to be mentors. And I think that's a great thing, and particularly to extend those mentorship opportunities for women. In negotiation situations, particularly like if you're hiring somebody, you can make a personal difference in not having gender disparities in the pay scale in your organization. And so but it takes figuring out for yourself not to always go for, I know, the budget will be tight, but how you can do this without going for the lowest possible salary, because 9 times out of 10, a woman's going to accept a lower salary than a man is. So, I feel a kind of personal responsibility for that. And Linda Babcock, when she gave her talk, just gave a beautiful little case example of how she nudged up a woman faculty member she was hiring because a male faculty member she was hiring that same year, negotiated higher salary than the woman did. And I thought she did the right thing when she did that. And then finally, I didn't talk much about personal goals, but of course I think that's absolutely essential. What do you want in your life? And again, the issue of balance. What costs are you willing to absorb? What losses are you willing to take to achieve something else? And these are career versus family issues, taking time out, deciding whether you want to, and I still would feel a lot of conflict about this as I think about the choices. In the last Women in Leadership session, we had an interesting discussion about women deciding not to go for the chief executive role. And is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? And that's the stuff of this personal choice struggle, it seems to me. And it's hard for me to say that's a good thing or it's a bad thing overall, but I would want to say that I would hope that every woman who is a leader will think about what the right thing for her is, and if that means you're going to choose a less ambitious position, so be it. But if you're not willing to accept that, then so be that as well. And those are where the hard choices are. So I'm going to stop here and look forward to your questions and comments. So thank you very much.